Welcome to Maine, we're stretched to the bone. Prices keep rising, the paycheck stays prone. Inflation keeps knocking, won't leave us alone. They're selling the lie, groceries climbing, the gas tank is low. The bill's hitting harder than snow, but silence still blankets the truth. Where does it go? They're selling the lie. Housing is gridlocked from Portland to the county. Workers commute far past what feels soundly. Talk of solution comes yearly, not loudly. They're selling the lie.
Welcome to the Muddy Waters Podcast, where Mainers tell their stories, unfiltered.
Good morning, Maine. This is Chuck Ellis, and you are watching the Muddy Waters Podcast, which, as I often say, exists to help the people of Maine better understand what's going on in our state. And we do that through a number of different ways, one of which is just interviewing people who know a little bit of something about what's going on in ways. We interview active sitting legislators, and we interview candidates. And so today we are fortunate to have with us a candidate for House District 51 in Topsham, Annalyse Sarvinas. If I can get my words out. Thank you for joining us, Annalyse.
Thank you for having me. This is a great opportunity.
Yeah, well, I remember from my two attempts at running for office, what that's like and how there's so much that goes into being a candidate and trying to think about all the things that you need to do between hitting doors, between making sure that you've got your message right and you're saying it the way that people are going to best understand it, to really know what it is that you're looking to do and how you're looking to help the people of Maine, or your district really. But ultimately, as a representative, you represent your district, but you're really ultimately representing the entire state with the decisions that you make. They impact everyone. And so there's a lot that goes into that and going on the radio and things like that. So I know a little bit about where you're coming from. And partly how I got to the point of doing this podcast was trying to think about how we can help, people with common sense ideas be able to get those in front of the people, so that people have a better understanding about who is potentially running to represent them. So in light of that, today, I want to know, who are you? Where do you come from? And, what in the world has possessed you to throw your name in the hat to get involved in politics at such a divisive and toxic time in our state and country?
Yeah, so as you already said, I'm Annalyse Sarvinas, and I am running for the House District 51 here in Topsham. And I grew up in Maryland, right? However, I spent all of my summers here. My grandmother was born and raised here. When I was about 6, I think they retired and they moved back up here. And I spent my entire life coming here for my summers. And I always knew I wanted to live here when I, grew up. It's beautiful, for one. And I just loved it. I spent time, on our coastlines, hiking our mountains. Once I got into those teenager years, I kind of learned that what happens at the quarry stays at the quarry. And it really didn't take long after I graduated high school. I moved here when I was 19, and went to school, started work, started a family, and really planted my roots here like I always knew that I would. I have 2 boys, and they're 17 and 12, and raising them here it's been a blessing. And it's kind of neat now to look back. They're a little bit older. We really did have our American dream here. And it was a state that allowed us to do that. They're getting older and kind of, actually, with having boys, I've volunteered in a multitude of different things, right? Like they're involved in sports, they're involved in scouts, church, and, you know, all the things that come with having a family. I've been involved in all of it. And as far as, you know, what got me into politics, I mean, it's my kids, right? Because I see our state starting to go this direction where I worry sometimes that they're not going to have the same opportunities that I had. You know, just for example, we bought our home when I was 24. And I worry sometimes, you know, I'm not so sure that we're making, you know, decisions that will allow my oldest to buy a home when he's 24. It's the decisions that are made in Augusta really do directly impact our lives and the way of life up here. And I want to preserve the way it was when I got here, because it allowed me to have my family and build my dream. And I worry that's slipping away.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. I mean, this is one of the biggest things that, like, I think everybody is running on, whether you're Democrats or Republicans or independents, is affordability. I think the difference is the solutions, and I think also asking the question of how did we get here? How did we get to the point where we have this affordability crisis? Where did that come from? And like, I'd say that there's one group that identifies the problem and how we got here appropriately, and one that does not. And so anyway, but yeah, so I think that's really, it doesn't surprise me that concern is what's one of the driving forces and having you, you know, choose to run for office, because it is like, you hear it. I was in a meeting today, actually, for an organization that I serve on the board for, and somebody made a comment about gas as related to a place called Buc-ee's that I've been to down in Texas. People know what Buc-ee's is. And somebody joked that gas is like 50 cents. And it's like, well, or 5 cents. It's like, it's not, but it's discount. It's cheaper. It is cheaper there, generally speaking, is my understanding. And somebody's like, oh yeah, gas. Whew, we need those prices to come down, right? Everybody feels the weight of the cost of living here. And yeah, so it is the big thing. Anyway, I'll let you continue though. And like, obviously that's one of the things that drew you into this. But I'll let you continue. Like yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know, taxes, when I'm doing doors, I think taxes is probably the number one thing that people are bringing up. You know, gas is kind of its own beast, but if we could get a hold on what we're doing with taxes, it would alleviate a lot of the pressure for people financially. There's been a lot of tax increases in the last 8 years that Democrats have had control in Augusta. I was not happy to find out that they were taxing my Netflix and chill. Okay, like that's not cool, guys. Like we don't need that. And a couple of things that I'd like to do is bring back the senior tax cap. It was absolutely heartbreaking to watch our neighbor. He's up there in age, right? Like he's in his 80s and rightfully retired, and he had to go back to work 2 years ago because he's very careful. He nickels and dimes everything. And I saw him he's a landscaper. I saw him getting his stuff in his truck, and I said, "Where are you going?" It's like 6 a.m. He's like, I got to go back to work. And then later that day, we had a longer discussion, and he's like, taxes went up again, and I got to make ends meet. And that broke my heart. I'm like, you've already paid your fair share. You shouldn't have to go back to work. You know, my grandparents live up north, up in Hancock. And that's where my grandmother was, and her whole side of the family, born and raised. And they had a hard time this year with the cost of heat and taxes going up, and they don't have that cap anymore that kind of protects their set income. So the senior tax cap is a big one. I'd also like to see the gas tax exemption for veterans. I know that that's something that's come up. Definitely the veterans and our folks on fixed incomes, like there's things we can do to help them. And I don't see our current leadership in Augusta really doing much that considers their way of life.
Well, they're definitely not considering cutting taxes.
No, not even a little bit.
Right. Like their solutions always include more taxes and then programs to get, to help people from the additional taxes, rather than like, maybe if we reduce taxes, that would make it easier for people to live. And anyway, maybe the free market might do something positive. Anyway, I don't know.
Free markets never let me down personally. I think that's fair to say for everybody. Every tax that they take is money out of our paychecks, and clearly they have enough with these $300 checks that Mills has started to send out. It's like, you know what? You probably didn't need to take that in the first place. If you've got enough left over to be sending out to people, you didn't need to take it from me in the first place. And another thing that's coming up when I'm at doors, it's creeping up to pretty close second to taxes is the fraud. And I really prosecute the fraud and we stop that from happening, we wouldn't need to keep taking more and more and more taxes, because it wouldn't be wasted in the first place.
What's interesting is I keep hearing that. So like, tell me more, like, is this like regardless of what door you're going to, like Democrat, Republican, Independent, doesn't matter, fraud is a big issue?
I think everybody has a problem with fraud. Yeah. We might bicker on, what to do about it, or, who's to blame. But at the end of the day, I think all Topsham residents have an issue with fraud. It's stealing, right? And they're not stealing their own money. They're stealing our money. And it's not going to help the places where it's supposed to be helping. And I think everybody has a problem with that, regardless of which side of the aisle you're on.
Yeah. No, I think they should. But when you hear, some politicians, they want to pretend like it's not happening, despite the obvious evidence that it is happening. I mean, Mills this week, right, just suspended payments to 5 different organizations that I think they could have done it earlier. But anyway, it's like there's just a clear admission that there's an issue here. I don't think they wanted to make that in the middle of campaign season, but they did.
It's happening. And if some people are saying it's not, like, I hate to tell you, but you're mistaken. It is definitely happening. I have a good friend of mine who, used to work in investigating some stuff, and she's disclosed some pretty heartbreaking things when it comes to the fraud and the Mainers who are impacted by it. And that was something I hadn't really considered. When you talk about fraud, you definitely think about, the theft and the misuse of funds, but you don't always think about the individual Mainers and their families that are impacted, especially when it comes to the healthcare fraud. When you say, when you advertise that you have a home healthcare business and somebody signs their mother up for that, and then nobody shows up because it's not a legitimate business, those people need to be in jail. That needs to be prosecuted. Because then you get into this space where it's not just a money issue, It's a moral, how we treat our neighbors issue. And I have a very big problem with that, mistreating our neighbors.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and that's one of the other things that we've brought up on the podcast in the past related to fraud is that like you should like if you think that the government programs are a good thing, you should be even more furious than anybody else that the funds are not being used to actually help people in need, right? Like if we're going to have government programs to help people who are in need, we're going to have that social safety net that we talk about, right? And there are groups that want to completely eliminate that, and they're right. But like if you're the group that wants to keep it, you should want to make sure it's functioning appropriately and it's actually helping people in need and not being abused. So I think that's really important. It's not surprising that that's one of the things that's coming up as you go to the doors, because, everybody's sitting here struggling financially. And then to hear the money, the government spending.
And money, I am not.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. And I'm not one that wants to get rid of those programs. In fact, we've used those programs. I was very young when I had our first and our first boy, and we were on food stamps. I got WIC. It is humbling when you go to use your, back then they were the big bulky checks and whatever. It is humbling when you are in that grocery line and somebody behind you is making fun of you or making snarky comments. And it's like, I don't know what to tell you. Like we just moved here. I had a baby. My husband was laid off. Like we've been through it. There is a good place for those programs to help people stay afloat while they're struggling. I'm definitely not interested in getting rid of programs, but we also can't, like you said, we have to be careful of how we run them so that they can stay operational. And fraud is just one of those things where there's just no place for fraud. It's just theft, plain and simple. There's no place for it. And it does, in the end, end up harming the people who actually do need the services. And it harms the people who, the money's taken out of their check. They're never going to see it again. And then it's just gone, like a leaf in the wind, disappeared.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So what are the other things? I think you said that's the number 2 thing. Number 1 thing I think you're hearing at doors is taxes. Number 2 is fraud.
Well, education's another big one. And it's not necessarily something I'm hearing at doors, but something I just hear because of what I do, right? I'm a teacher. I'm in the schools. I have friends that are teachers. I've got kids. And so they have friends who have parents, obviously. And so education is a big one that we need some help, right? We're not ranking very well in our state for education, particularly with literacy and math. And there's things we can do about it, right? We just have to, I don't know if maybe people don't want to admit that it's a problem. The Department of Education has admitted it's a problem. They say we need to get back to the basics, which I agree with.
There's a big reversal. Oh, sorry. Yeah. A big reversal from where they were at 2 years ago when they were basically saying we don't need to worry about reading, writing, arithmetic, whatever, because we have AI. That was
they had said it needed to take a backseat to social emotional learning, and it's like,
yeah.
Well, I personally think, and I've seen in the classroom many times, that kids actually gain confidence and self-esteem when they can master these difficult things like reading and math. So, and there's things we can do, right? There's literacy reforms that have been tried in multiple other states that have done very well. They're phonics-based, and sometimes when people hear that, they get a little worried that we're only going to do phonics and leave out, the reading comprehension and the other really important pieces to learning how to read. But phonics based just means that you're teaching kids how to decode words. You know, when they're little and they've got picture books, not, I could go on and on about this for a long time. So stop me anytime I'm
No, that's
going
great.
too deep. But the education part is my jam. So schools back in the late 90s has switched to what's called the cueing theory. And so when you're reading these simple kindergarten, first grade level books, if a kid comes to a word they don't know, they ask themselves these questions. Does it look right? Does it sound right? Does it make sense? Well, that could be a useful skill for readers who are already pretty good at reading and have some decodable skills that they can fall back on. But if you don't know how to read, you don't know if it looks right. You probably don't know if it sounds right unless it's being read to you.
Right.
And you could probably tell if it makes sense if you can figure out all the other words. And so there's a lot of reliance on pictures, which, as we all know, as you get older, you have less and less pictures in your book. So that skill doesn't really work that well with teaching kids to read long term. And, so being phonics based means that you're also teaching them how to decode words phonetically. And that carries them through much longer and into much more difficult words than the cueing theory. So literacy reform, the states that have done that, it's a phonics based system. And poverty kind of comes up in that topic, but the states that have tried that are not, it's states like Mississippi, so they understand poverty,
Right.
and they're still doing really, really well. Even some of the charter schools in Baltimore have done phonics-based literacy reform and have seen excellent results. And these are kids that are coming from the same exact neighborhoods as the ones that are going to the Baltimore public schools, and their scores are, astronomically higher than the ones going to the public schools. So when we bring programs into our state, I really like to look at where they came from and were they successful. I really am obsessed with outcome-based success. Like, did it actually work, or was it just the cool new thing to try?
So like this is just one of those things that I just like, my mind is like, how in the world is this not what's currently happening, right? Like, why are we not using evidence-based successful learning tools rather than like this?
That
sounds
could
like
be a whole
cool
separate
idea.
podcast.
It blows my mind, because this is just like what you're saying is just common sense. You're like, well,
Yeah.
what we're currently doing is not working. This is how it was instituted. This is something that other people are doing to pivot against it, and they're seeing success. Why don't we do that? I mean, this just seems like, again, this is basics. This is like legislation 1.1 or 0.1, not even 1. We haven't got, you know what I mean? Like, this is like when you're thinking about how to more effectively help our kids be ready for life, it just makes sense to do what works. And yeah, so it blows my mind that we're not already doing this, but that sounds like a really great idea. Thank you. I'm learning along the way.
The topic of why we don't, it could be its own podcast. There's billions of dollars wrapped up in education curriculum, and that's its own monster. But at the very least, we can start with literacy reform. The other thing that I'd really like to see are the Maine educational tax credits. And some people hear that and they hear school choice, and that's a pretty, you either love it or you hate it. And I've heard all different sides of it. It's not, what I'm talking about is not the school choice that I think a lot of people think of when they hear it. This is privately funded. It's tax deductible, and it can go to anything educational related. Yes, you can use it for homeschool. Yes, you can use it for private school, but school boards can also request funding and use it for their public schools to help things like special education, reading recovery, after school care. And so it's not the same thing as government issued vouchers. A lot of homeschoolers didn't like that idea because they don't want their home education tied to the government. That's why they homeschool. That fair. Okay, fair enough. Schools didn't like that idea because they were afraid they'd lose kids and lose funding and, kind of be left in a lurch. And we need our public schools, right? Not everybody can homeschool or private school. And it is very important to have a society that is educated. We have to have our public schools. We can't do anything that is a hindrance to their success. But these Maine educational tax credits, like I said, they are privately funded and tax deductible. And essentially it's like these little accounts where, like, let's say if I wanted to contribute to a tax credit, I could say, you know what? I think STEM is really important. I'm going to donate, I don't know, just making up numbers here. I'm going to contribute, $500,000 specifically to go to STEM. And it would go into the STEM account, and then that person could get their tax write-off for however much they contributed for. And then the school boards or homeschool or private, whatever it is, request access to those funds. And so that's kind of how that works and how it would benefit everybody.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. I'm not opposed. I like it. Yeah. So as you're going to the doors, obviously these are some of the issues that are coming up. And one of and this one didn't specifically come up, but this is more just, or as much, I should say, but people talk about it. As you said, you're a teacher, so you hear a lot of it. You're in the midst of it. You're in the thick of it, so to speak. And so obviously you're passionate about that, but what are, like, I mean, obviously these are the issues you're hearing as you go to the door, but like, my question is, like, what are these the same issues that are like on your campaign platform? Because like when I ran for office, I picked primarily 3 issues. There's so much that needs to be done, I think, in Augusta to fix things here in the state of Maine. But, I think especially when you're trying to, like, it's one person can only do so much, and like what are your areas of focus, I guess, going to be on what you think you can accomplish by going up to Augusta, being one of, for those of you who don't know, 151 there are 151 people in the House of Representatives and then 35 in the Senate, if my numbers are right. So one out of 151, what were the areas you'd be focusing on?
Those 3 mostly: taxes, fraud, education. I know healthcare is another big one. Repealing the certificate of need, expanding so our youngest, we are intimately familiar with the healthcare system in Maine. Our youngest was born with a lot of complications. In fact, we were in the hospital for an extra 2 weeks when he was born. He almost died a couple times. It was quite traumatic. And then as a result of, I think, how, the complications at his birth, he's 12 now. And I'd say the first 10 years, chronic, severe, acute asthma, like not the asthma that you get periodically because you've been sick. It was constant. I used to keep journals. In fact, I was just kind of looking through it the other day, and I was like, wow, I can't believe we lived through that. He was on 7 different medications. He had a team of 4 different doctors. And so we are very aware of how long it takes to get in to see somebody. how long it takes to find a good specialist, the battles with insurance and all that sort of thing. But if I had to narrow it down, because it's easy to say all the things that are wrong, right? And then, but when you look at how am I actually going to fix that, you have to start with small, measurable goals. And I think repealing the certificate of need and expanding the scope of practice are two small areas that we can start with to help try to get this healthcare thing back to the way it should be.
So I want to be clear, because I think that some people know what the certificate of need situation is, but some people don't. And so I can go ahead and briefly explain like what that is, just so that people know, because I think it's a really important thing that needs to get repealed, because it's basically creating a barrier to new healthcare practices starting up. In order to start a new healthcare practice that costs over a certain amount of money, I think what it is, in order to like establish it, which most healthcare facilities would have to spend that amount of money, they have to get approval from this board, and the board is primarily run by it is run by the existing healthcare practices, who have a vested interest in limiting your ability to go to other places. Obviously, they don't want a new healthcare facility, because that means that people might go there instead of to their healthcare facility. And so the current, it's kind of like a little bit of not a monopoly, right? A single company that's preventing, but it's what we call an oligopoly, which is a couple of companies working together to keep their competition from being able to get to a certain size, so that they don't have to compete with, blocking them out of the market so that they don't have to compete with them. This is why I think free market capitalism is so important, because it's all focused on making a better experience for the consumer. If you free that up and remove their ability to limit it, not only are you going to potentially have access to more places to go where you might actually be able to get in and have a doctor without having to wait 3 months to get your first appointment if you're looking for a doctor. Not only will you not have to go through that nonsense, but also the existing healthcare facilities will realize that in order to be able to keep the people coming to them, they're going to have to work harder and make sure that they're doing better for their people. So I think I'm really excited that that's one of the issues that you're talking about, because it is so important people actually being able to be taken care of here in the state.
Yeah. And like I said, small, it's not small when you think about it, but measurable, achievable goals to start kind of moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
And another growing thing with healthcare is the closing maternity units.
Yes.
Is another big one. I think it's probably the biggest threat to women's healthcare at this point. You have to have safe places to deliver your babies. Yeah. And so I was really disappointed. I think yesterday is when I saw the headline that the one a little bit east of here, was it Lincoln?
Is it Miles? Is it that the one?
I thought it said Lincoln.
It might be in Lincoln, but I think the organization is called Miles something. Or yeah. I've seen some stuff on social media about it.
To close. Yeah. And I have family up north that travels out of state when they have their babies, because it's over an hour drive. I mean, you hear all the time about, moms not making it to the delivery unit and giving birth on the side of the road, but we don't want that to be our norm. Right. So that's another one we gotta figure that one out.
Do you have any thoughts? And we can, if not, I mean, it's definitely an issue that we need to figure out how to address, but like on why that's happening.
I've heard mixed things.
Okay.
I've heard that it's, a Maine care issue. It's a, funding issue, which again would lead back to, well, if we weren't wasting billions in fraud, they would probably not have this issue. I think in time we'll learn a little bit more about why.
Yeah.
But that's the thing I'm hearing now, is that it's a it's a funding issue.
I imagine that means the Democrats will say that the solution is to tax people more.
Oh,
so
I'm
that we
sure there's a solution to everything.
Well, it's funny listening to, just for fun, when I even though I was going to vote in the Republican primary, obviously I was curious about who had come out of the Democrat primary in the gubernatorial race. And so I listened to a number of their debates on the major news stations, and literally everything was, we need to tax more. We need to spend more, which, can't spend without getting more in. So it's like, we need to spend more to tax more. And their solution to everything was spend. And the problem is, like, you eventually you run out of other people's money to spend. But anyway, we'll leave that alone. So, but yeah. So, well, one of the things that I'm curious about, because I've met your opponent in the past. The Cumberland County Republicans did an event in Topsham last year, and I had the opportunity to meet your opponent. And interesting character. But what would you say are, like, part of running a race, is you're trying to win, and in order to win, you've got to kind of show how you're different from your opponent, which I don't think will be difficult in this case. But I'm just curious, like, what is, like, where do you, like, I guess how do you contrast with your opponent? Like, why are you the choice versus your opponent?
So we are quite different. I believe whenever you have a question about how something should run or what the best answer is, I believe that freedom's always the answer. People should be free to build their lives as they see fit with as minimal government intervention as possible. And that, I think that pretty much is the biggest one, is little government intervention as possible. Less taxes, less regulations. I know Maine daycares are seeing this issue with, like, they're just being killed by regulations. And it's killing home daycares. I'm all about following the laws, following the Constitution, freedom, minimal government intervention. And I'm also a big supporter of our local law enforcement. I grew up with all the men in my family are military. My dad was in the Marines. My grandfather retired from the Navy. And I grew up with this sense of respect. Like, they put their lives on the line. They keep us safe. They do the dangerous jobs that nobody wants to do. When you really stop and think about what they do on a day-to-day basis, it's more than traffic stops and the stuff you see on the news, right? They're going, just think for a minute about what domestic calls might look like. Right? Like, they're going into situations that nobody wants to touch with a 10-foot pole. So I have a lot of respect for them, knowing that if I am ever, for example, my husband travels for work now, knowing that if I am ever afraid when he leaves, if I hear a bump in the night or whatever, I can call them and they're going to be here. They deserve a lot more respect than they are given for everything that they do. I go to our football games. I always see 2 or 3, watching the game, having a good time. Like, they really are part of our community, the law enforcement that we have here in Topsham. And I think that, that needs to be preserved. That's another thing that I hear when I go to doors, is that, all this stuff that's going on with law enforcement, all these other places, they're like, you know what? We have really great law enforcement here in Topsham, and we want the security in our town to be preserved. And it's another thing with my kids, right? Like, the reasons that we knew we wanted to raise them here and nowhere else is they're safe here. I can let my boys ride their bikes to Dairy Queen. I can let them play out in the front yard and walk to their friend's house and build their forts in the woods and, whatever feral mischief these boys get into, they can do it safe here. And that's because we have law enforcement that really has integrated well into our community and upholds the safety and the laws that we have to let us live as free as we can possibly live. And I think those two are probably the biggest differences, like less taxes, less regulation, and supporting the law enforcement that keeps it safe enough that we can be free, right? We wouldn't have the freedom we have in our neighborhood of being able to kind of go where we want, do what we want without them. When I travel from here in Topsham up to Hancock to visit my family, the fact that I can travel safely as a woman and not worry about getting mugged or kidnapped or, anything like that. There's so many places in the world where women can't do that. And I get to do that because I live here and because our law enforcement makes sure that any threat to my freedom of mobility is taken care of. And I have so much appreciation for that. I think those two things are the starkest differences.
I think they're obviously really important distinctions and should be enough but there's other things obviously that I think set you apart from your opponent. But I mean, people in America, I think, need to realize, especially here in the state of Maine, that our law enforcement, are they perfect? No. Do they make some mistakes? Sure, they do. But
right, but is any human perfect?
Well, I just want to compare because I've been other places, right? Like I've spent a decent amount of time in some other countries that where the police are literally corrupt, and they don't like you might get concerned if you see a police officer. Where here we only get concerned if we see a police officer for speeding or if we know we have some contraband. We're drinking and driving or something like that, or like, years ago, it used to be people had weed or were smoking weed and they were afraid of getting pulled over because of that. Right. But for the most part, we don't fear the police.
And to be clear, when you're in that situation, you're not actually afraid of the officer. You're afraid of the consequences of your actions.
Right. And like, again, they do a really thankless job. And if you look at like the vast majority of what they do is handling domestic disputes, right? That's a lot. Like the local police, that's most of what they do. So they're dealing with and helping the people who are in really challenging situations on a daily basis. And they're doing that while being disliked by a lot of people and mistreated ultimately. I have a number of good friends who are police officers, and again, it's not an easy job, and again, we don't know how good we have it in terms of police. If you compare the way that the police operate here in the state of Maine over against most places in the world, it is very, very, very safe. In fact, I know people, and I won't cite them necessarily, who have come here from other countries, and they talk about like, wait, you don't have gates on your compounds. You don't have like walls up around your houses. You just have a driveway and people can just pull into it. The reality is we can do that because of how safe it is here. And so like we have small problems and they get magnified in the media, but ultimately, especially here in the state of Maine, as somebody commented in the chat, you all can't see it, but I can see it. But some people made some comments on X. Sometimes we don't even lock the doors, is what a guy named Sider said.
It's
and
funny that he says that, because I remember when the first time I had my parents come and visit from Maryland, and it's still a thing when we travel down there. They're like, did you lock the door? And I'm like, Ma, we don't lock the door. It's okay. And she's like, no, you have to lock your doors. And when we go down to visit, it's always like, oh, I forgot to grab something from the car. It's like, oh, can you unlock the car, please? Why does everything always have to be locked? So even geographically within the US, there's places that people lock their doors. And I have always been really grateful that where I chose to live and build my dream is not one of those places where, if I leave my car unlocked, I leave my car unlocked, and it's going to be fine, because we have, not only do we have really great law enforcement, but we have really great neighbors, and we have a really great community in Topsham.
100%. Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah. Well, well, thank you for running for office. Well, like, one of the things that I say is, like, this is such a thankless job. Running, you spend all kinds of time, energy, and effort in hopes that you can go up to Augusta and in a sense be abused by like, if you get elected, people are going to all sides are going to throw stuff at you, either because some of them you're not doing what they think you should be doing, and you're not doing enough, even if you're in the same have the same ideology, and the other side hates you because you don't have the same ideology. And so, like, it's this really thankless job. And you do all this in hopes that you might be able to get, to be able to be up in Augusta, representing the people of Maine, the people of Topsham in your case. And so I just want to thank you for being willing to do that, and obviously come on the podcast and tell us, like, who you are and where you're coming from, and what you're hoping to do. I like a lot. I like what I'm hearing. I wish I was in Topsham and I could vote for you, but how can people help you? So people, whether they're in Topsham, if they're in Topsham and they're in your district, how can they help you? And then how can other people help you?
So anybody from anywhere can go to votesarvinas.com and sign up. That'll put you on our volunteer list. Again, that's votesarvinas.com. And we are not going to send a bunch of emails about, like, news and stuff like that. This is strictly communication for campaign business. So when we have our volunteer workshops, when we reach a goal that we've been working towards, there will be reminders when early voting starts, and when we do events for the campaign. It'll be stuff like that. We're not bombarding people's emails with, like, junk news. Also, contributing $5. I am almost maxed out. Almost. We had a couple that were bumped off of the QC list, so still working on getting those. And but mostly at this point, it's building our community campaign and our volunteer army.
Yeah, so you need volunteers. You probably wouldn't. It wouldn't hurt if somebody's in Topsham, and for them to endorse you, if depending on the situation. But you would love to have some volunteers, some people to do that. And what you mentioned before, just again for clarity, most people probably know this, but they might not. Is the running as a clean elections candidate, as you are, the way that you're funded is through the Clean Elections Program, getting people to give from the district to give $5 contributions to the Maine Clean Election Fund. And then you get your funding from that, and so you're almost maxed out, which is great. So you've got some money to be able to spend on your campaign, and that's awesome. So glad to hear that. And so volunteers is primarily what you need, and a few qualifying contributions or QCs.
Yeah, we I went last week or the week before. Turned in. I was so excited because I was like, I've got my 180, right? Because that's the number you need to max out. And I'm like, I've got it. And then there was just a couple that they didn't like their signature, or the nitpicky things, and so I'm like, oh, come, you guys are killing me. So I'm like, let me just get a few more. Let me get a few more, because I'm like, I like to do things all the way. I don't like to put half the participation in. So that's one of my goals. I'm like, if I'm going to do this, we're getting all of it. So
nice. Well, cool. Well, congratulations on that, because that's a tall order right there. Getting that many QCs. It's interesting because having run myself and gone to doors to do this, it's $5, right? It's nothing. If you want change or you want to give people a chance, it's a really small amount of money. And yet there are a lot of people that are like, no, I'm not giving you $5. Like, what are you doing? What are you talking about? You came to my door. You're talking to me about politics. And I didn't invite you, and you want me to give you $5. And even though it's only $5, they still, like, some people really bristle at that. So if you got that many $5 contributions, that means you talk to a lot of people.
I've talked to a lot of people, and hot tip for anybody who might be listening who's also a candidate. What works, I found that what works and what doesn't work. Texting or emailing people to ask, or even phone calls, is not quite as effective. A lot of people, especially with all the scammers right now, they're really reluctant to get a text that says to contribute anything. Face-to-face is always way more effective. But also, once you get some of your like core volunteers, having them go to the people they know on their street or their friends is also super effective, because then the ask is coming from someone that voter trusts, And I've been really lucky. I've had a couple people that are volunteering with my campaign that are like, I'll collect $5 for you. I'm like, thank you. So that's also super helpful to have people that are willing to go out there and help, and have conversations with their neighbors is super helpful. I'm not doing this all by myself. I assure you, I've got some really awesome people that are working with me.
That's awesome. Well, I think that's great. Well, and just really thankful that you're taking, you're doing all this work to try and help the people of Maine, the people of Topsham. I mean, this is civil service, which is what we need. We don't necessarily need more quote unquote politicians, right? And I know you.
Yeah, I am not running to be a politician. I don't want to be a politician. I think being in the legislature, being a representative, it is supposed to be a civil service. It was not designed for people to make this their career and make their full-time living off of it. I think that's, it's just not for me. And I did announce at my campaign launch, and I'll say it again, I'm not going to accept the House of Representatives salary if I win, because this is not something that I should be getting paid to do. This is just something that you do for the benefit of your community and for your kids, that I want my kids to grow up and stay here. I don't want them to have to move out of state for any reason we just listed, because they can't afford it, or because they want a better education for their kids, or because they need better. My youngest, what if something happens with my youngest and he has to move out of state to get better health care? Like, these are the things I don't want. I want my babies close to home. And so, this is something I'm doing for them and for everybody else's kids for the same reason. Like, not everybody's in a position where they can do this. But I am. So I think it would be a disservice if I didn't do it, because I am in a position that I can.
Well, I think again, I wholeheartedly agree with one of the biggest problems we have in our I think our country is how much money politicians make, and Maine politicians don't make a ton. This is not, but I think the idea behind being a politician or being an elected person, according to the way that our founders set it up, was not that this would be a career opportunity, but that this would be literally, it was civil service. And so I love that sentiment, and I really appreciate your willingness to do all this for free. And essentially, so I think that's awesome. So cool. Well, before we go, because I think we've covered most of what I think we had intended to cover, is there anything else that you want people to know?
Just that I'm giving it the best I got, and I would encourage people to vote early. Just gonna throw that out there awkwardly here at the end. And there'll be more coming out from my campaign on why and the benefits of voting early. But definitely vote. We have such a privilege of being able to vote for who represents us. And it's another reason why I decided to put my name on the ballot. We were talking about the differences between myself and my opponent. And I think that the differences are so stark. I think everybody in Topsham has a voice and deserves to have their voice and their values represented on that ballot. It's what makes us, it's what makes the United States the United States. There's so many places where we don't have that privilege. Or I should say people don't have that privilege, but we do. And having both of our names is a good way to make sure every single person in this town is going to have the opportunity to make sure that what they want, they're able to vote for. So don't waste that opportunity. Don't waste that blessing. Go and vote, and make sure that your voice is counted. And for people who say, I'm tired today, like it's just one, like that's number one, that's one reason that voting early is so great, right? You have so much time to get your vote in. And last cycle, Sanford only won their election by one vote. So one vote is everything. Don't sell yourself short if you're thinking like, oh, I'm just one person. Like every person matters. Every person's vote matters. I want everyone to vote.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important point, and I'll just highlight it too and say I've had multiple people that would not have voted if I had not encouraged them to vote. And I actually multiple times, I think maybe both of the last 2 years, no. Well, anyway, in the last couple of years, I've done this twice where I've gone and voted early with someone else, because that was getting them there. That was the way to do it, because otherwise they wouldn't have voted, because they are people that either for medical reasons or other reasons would be uncomfortable voting on election day. And so it's also an opportunity to like get somebody else out to vote. Be like, hey, if you have somebody, somebody who's like, maybe it's concerned that they might not vote because they care, but they might get busy or whatever, go vote with them and vote early.
Yeah.
That's my recommendation. But anyway, great stuff. Well, thank you so much, Annalyse, for coming on, and for all the the things you're talking. Again, all your points I think are really valid points, and I'd be really excited to see you up in Augusta, helping to champion those things. So I encourage anybody in Topsham to reach out, volunteer, give $5 if they can, and contribute in some way to help Annalyse make it up to Augusta and be a better representative for the people of Topsham. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll see the rest of you back here later today, actually, for those who are paying close attention. Aaron Chadbourne will be on, and we'll be talking about some of the bigger races in the state, where they sit, and what's going on with those. So we'll look forward to seeing you all back here, and thanks again.